Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Compound Thesis, where we discuss the intersection of crypto and the capital markets. I'm Jim. I'm the head of sales at Compound, and our guest today is Richard Yolland. He's the head of solutions engineering at Copper. Copper is a leading digital asset custodian and institutional trading platform based in the UK, which sees over $50 billion in monthly volume. Richard, welcome to the show. Good to see you.
Cool. Thanks, Jim. Thanks for asking me to attend.
So you've got a great background. I think it'd be really helpful to hear your origin story of how you made the transition from TradFi into crypto.
Okay. I had a great time in TradFi, 21 years investment banking, 6 different banks. And in that time, I was fortunate that whilst they're vertically oriented, I got to do a lot of stuff like risk systems, front office business management, change management, business process, business architecture, transformation, a whole load of different things. And it was great. But the more I did, the more I wanted to connect across the horizontal, to do end to end, bring all the teams, weave everything together. But, as you're aware, the organizations are so vertically structured that, you get rewarded for what you do in your vertical, not for, the bigger picture. I was constantly getting redirected, focus on this. And, the thing is, though, because I added value to across the horizontal and end to end, it was just frustrating. Opportunity arose and I left and did some management consulting work, largely focusing in the tech and the platform space, working for several tier 1 investment banks for that. Basically, then one day I got a call from Jake Rogers, who is then the Chief Information Security Officer of Copper. And he said, hi, he said, a colleague of yours gave me your CV. I'm looking for a head of IT. And so I said, I'm not a head of IT. He said, okay, so what are you then? I said, I do this. He said, okay, let's come in. So next day they arranged, I came into Copper in the afternoon, met every single person in the C-suite, like bustling in and out of the boardroom. About a week later, got a phone call and made me a job offer. And it's been fantastic. I can honestly say, like, hand on heart, it feels like the job I've been waiting for all my life. Now in solution engineering, we work with everything, every team, every individual, both is on the bank and the engagements as well as internal to the company. So it's just, I'm working with something which is efficient, streamlined. We truly view it as the future of finance. And, I get to do this all day, every day with my team. And a lot of what I do is fly around the world to various places, running workshops and effectively bringing companies up the curve as to, the benefits of crypto and digital assets.
That's exciting. It's great to see the evolution of your career, all the different building blocks in TradFi and management consulting kind of led you to this space. And, just curious if you could share a little bit more about what Copper does for the audience that might not be familiar, and, a little bit more specifically about what your role does there. You talked about, your horizontal exposure across many different functions. It'd be interesting to hear how you're working with clients and what your role is at Copper.
Sure. Great. So typically, from the marketing and advertising, Copper positions itself as the institutional gateway to digital assets. We use something called MPC technology as a means of, secured and protecting our wallets, and effectively, put it out there as the gold standard in secure digital asset custody, which is really what it is. The guys, Copper, what we just said, we're primarily a custodian. We start off as a custodian, 4 guys in a 1-bedroom flat in Shoreditch, 4.5 years ago, effectively building a platform hand in hand with clients. And effectively, they were building up initially the custody offering, but from there, it's been extended. And within Copper, there are 2 core streams. There's our original stream, which is a SaaS platform, which obviously is still going. And we now call it our prime and custody business. And this is for clients that are like buy-side clients who come here. They manage their digital asset holdings. So store it very safe, wallet security, sharding. But one of the key things we offer is we offer additional revenue streams. We have features and products called WallGuard and Clearloop. We've got our own DeFi connector. We've got staking, NFTs, collateral management, a massive range of things. And this is part of our core appeal. There's lots of our competitors out there who do the standard thing, they do wallets and custody and security. But because of our background in custody, we've got the custody arm with all our features. And effectively looking, globally at the international market, effectively there's a massive demand and drive for clients, institutional clients, to get access to crypto. And obviously their typical, financial services interfaces are the large investment banks and the tier one banks. So the banks are realizing, if we don't get these products and our platform up and running ASAP, then we're going to miss this boat. So we have various key organizations in the world. You're always faced with the build versus buy. And the reality is you're not going to get a product or a platform of Copper's quality, in a 1 year or 2 year time frame. It's going to take a lot of building, a lot of expertise. By the time you've built it, it's going to be, old stuff. So effectively, the only solution for them is to buy a platform like Copper's. So effectively at Copper, the enterprise team was formed. And, the three pillars, the sales, you're headed up by Jürgen, myself, the solution engineering, and Kruno with enterprise technology. We're effectively the pillars. And what the enterprise offering is we work with the banks to actually deploy our platform, an instance of our platform on the bank. And it may be on our separate reservation on AWS or on theirs or Google Cloud or whatever. But the fact is, we're deploying a platform for them, and they now have their own platform, which they integrate with their systems. We rework op models, business processes, user interfaces, APIs. We completely redesign it with them. So that at the end of the day, they have, a digital asset custody platform. And you asked me my role. My role is effectively to do that with them. In the sales life cycle for enterprise clients is long. It's a long cycle. The sales, get the clients contacts, start bringing them in. But then when it moves from the demoing of the products to the detailed discussions, to due diligence questionnaires, RFIs, RFPs, setting up, singular, unique demo environments for these clients, running them through the success criteria. We do deep dive workshops covering legal, risk, compliance, operations, onboarding, KYC, sanction scheme, all this stuff. We provide them with information, documented material, workshop sessions, recorded material. And then obviously, on the back of a POC, the most typical route is, okay, guys, where do we sign up? And then we go through obviously legalities, but they're not, this is not a quick exercise. You're doing third-party risk management, vendor onboarding, legals, risk, all these factors before you're actually on. And then you are implementing a platform for an enterprise client. But whilst our platform is ready to go, the native enterprise and all the differences in the different banks is you have to customize it for them, and you take their request, but it's about the customization, the integration of the platform. But, end of the day, we are enabling these organizations to have a platform, a digital asset platform. And, that's my and my team's role.
Yeah, custody is super unique in this space. And so I want to dive into a little bit more about, the actual product that you're delivering and that change management process that you alluded to. But before doing so, you said it earlier, I think, 4 people in an apartment in Shoreditch. That's going to be an origin story for Copper. So obviously you have grown a ton over the last few years alongside the industry. Can you give us a sense of where we are on the institutional adoption curve? Like, what institutions are onboarding with Copper, and are there any interesting insights that you can share as to why certain firms are pushing harder into this space than others, whether it's banks or legacy custodians or asset managers, crypto native firms? And over the last few cycles, how has that pace of adoption changed? Is it continuing the momentum building as we are in this kind of winter right now, or just any of those insights would be super helpful?
Okay, sure. So I'll reverse your question. So I'll take the last one, the last one first. But basically, everything we're seeing is growing. Whilst man on the street, obviously the crypto winter less than ideal. Obviously, AUC goes down just due to the sheer devaluation of the cryptos. Ultimately, seeing a massive drive. My manager, the chief revenue officer of Copper, loves the expression of, we love the crypto winters because it washes out the dirt. This is his expression. But the reality is that in these times, institutions, no matter what kind of institution they are, they look for a flight to safety. And that's why we always have an influx, a steadily growing stream of people coming to us, because we are that point of safety. Everything we do is designed to de-risk, clients' portfolios, the assets they're holding. So much of what we do actually is enabling people to keep their assets, the digital assets, on our platform, yet still have the functionality to trade them and use them elsewhere, whilst obviously still with us avoiding the risk, say, of exchanges or counterparties going bust. As mentioned to you, there are 2 typical kinds of clients we get with our platforms. There's the prime and custody, and then there's enterprise. On the enterprise side, the reason it was created was for the investment banks. The investment banks are big banks, and it's a split between the institutional clients and the retail clients. Obviously, institutional typically numbering in the thousands, retail numbering in the millions. So we have different offerings. Run off the same platform, we have different offerings for those. These clients, it's a very long life cycle. It's,
Sure.
if you look at some of the banks like JP Morgan, say 250,000 people, just as an example, the size of some of these organizations, or State Street, also in the region of 200,000 people, really large institutions. And with so many teams, it just takes longer to join the dots in these organizations, more approval processes, more governance forums, boards to review. So these, sales life cycle here, we typically see, take between 6 to 12 months, just because the engagement, the proof of concept, the onboarding, risk evaluation, sign off. And obviously, this is not a cheap exercise. Budget needs to be signed off literally right to the top of the bank. On the prime and custody side, typically our profile is about 60%, are institutional investors. These are asset managers, crypto native hedge funds, traditional hedge funds. About 20%, extra 20% is prop shops, typically crypto prop shops, making money from buying and selling crypto. And then the last 20%, I'd say you could probably group into coin foundations. So coin foundations, neobanks, digital wallets and exchanges. This is pretty much the curve as we see it. Originally, as you know, crypto is seen as very sort of area prone to fraudulent and nefarious activities. And I say it's seen as, perception versus reality. This is how it's perceived as, ultimately blockchain and crypto is just a digital ledger, it's an accounting system. And actually everything that's done, you've got an immutable record forever that's fully traceable of where all the funds came from. We pride ourselves on integrating with providers like Chainalysis, TRM Labs for transaction monitoring and AML, looking at the travel rule, the FATF travel rule, and what that is, creating regarding compliance, traceability of funds. We have suspense accounts, holding wallets, everything gets screened before it comes in. We do a full, profile of the funds, where they've come from. So it's very much not a nefarious or fraudulent space. But as the world is finally realizing this, and in the world of governments as well, governments and regulators, as they're realizing this, and big things are being kicked off for them all to come to it, these things just take time. And that's where we are now, in an ever-increasing cycle or snowball of this activity coming up. In that, as it becomes more commercially accepted, everybody wants to get on board with it, because crypto is not a four-letter word anymore.
Yeah. So you mentioned there a State Street, for example, and I know that you announced a major partnership with them recently, which is an awesome opportunity for two of the largest custodians in their respective domains. Can you talk a little bit about this partnership and how it came about and what it means for asset managers and the market at large?
Sure. You're right. It's an awesome opportunity. We had such a fantastic time working with State Street. Literally when I joined Copper, this deal had been landed, and it was, basically myself and Kroon as well to get the details, the architecture, and working with several key people at State Street like Sven, Zahid, Marcus, and Abraham. We've effectively, evolved this. It's been a massive initiative across State Street. I think at the time Sven said, this collaboration will help State Street expand their product offering and roadmap. And effectively, as I mentioned to you, the banks are realizing that, clients want this. So State Street's the world's biggest custodian, I think it was last year. And the fact is, digital assets are very much an asset class they need on their books. So they wanted to get to it as soon as possible. If you look around at other banks, a lot of banks are dibbling and dabbling in blockchain and DLT, but digital asset platforms that they offer are still very limited. So the fact is, this was a key driver for State Street. Nadine Chakar, heading up digital for that. So we've been working, very closely with them, literally, meeting on a daily basis, obviously designing the products, what features they want. And it's a very interesting thing to note here that, and this is our recommendation to any of those listening, any potential customers listening, start small. Is, you start with your basic offering. Everything that happens is based on the wallet, your wallet, your security, your technology. That is where everything starts from. And then all the other features you build, you're building on top of that. But this is where you start off. It's also easier, in terms of go live, in terms of implementation, builds, de-risking effectively the project, to start small. as I've said, State Street it's typical of investment banks around the world now. We're seeing a massive drive of investment banks who want, and banks and retail banks and exchanges, or a whole range of enterprise clients who want, to be able to do this. But I said it just takes them typically a long time. The cycles are slow. Whether it's a crypto native firm, you might meet with them 2 or 3 times before they sign. With an enterprise, I would say 200 or 300 times. 30, 40, 50 meetings with a range of people for everybody to vet it, check it, cross-check it with themselves. It's just not a quick process. If you look also, if you look, I said, at the market at large, Coalition Greenwich did a report earlier this year. And basically in that report, they said very much they see clients, institutional clients, investors driving the actual market, the development, the functionality offered. And it's how we built our platforms, like hand in hand with these crypto firms, obviously working closely with State Street, taking a lot of their requests on board. But we also, we try to very much embody the Steve Jobs mantra of, we're actually going to design something and then convince the clients they want it. We're factoring all these things in, one, obviously to be client focused and central on what they want, but two, also to lead the market on new offerings that people, just go, wow, and we've got to have that.
Yeah, it's exciting to see the collaboration taking place, and I'm sure, as you mentioned, there's a lot of conversation, a lot of research, a lot of diligence across a bunch of different aspects of change management at a large institution, whether that's risk, compliance, legal, operations, you name it. If you could share a little bit of insight, knowing that you're more on the digital asset side, from what you're hearing from clients, how different is custody, in traditional asset classes versus crypto? If you could touch upon that, I think it's an interesting, dynamic that there's probably a lot of similarities, but also probably a lot of differences in just the way that these assets are custodied.
Yeah, it's a great question. Almost the Holy Grail of securities and settlement blockchain, what it enables. You're moving from what years ago was a T+7, a T+5, it's currently T+2 settlement. We're realistically look at implementing, a T0 DVP, atomic settlement. This is something we work with. Settlement is literally almost, instantaneous, obviously with smart contracts and how that can work. So that's really exciting. As I said, revolutionizing the world of finance. It may just be taking equity and digitizing equity, or taking the bond and digitizing a bond. That's one of the core features of it. You also, you look at stuff, it's, I said, the record's immutable, it's there, it's available, obviously taking, private blockchains aside, but there's high security, you have heightened security. We have, I think our InfoSec team's like 20 or 30 people. It's the largest team in the organization. You have rapid transactions, rapid number of transactions, reconciliations. If you look at something, the JPM coin, what they did with Onyx, whereas before clients were going and having to settle around the world, like between LOBs, different legal entities using Swift, and there was a Swift, there were delays, there were costs, there were, the confirmations, the reconciliations with, a single coin. And it's a part of, we get a lot of interest from that from organizations, creating for them their own digital token or coin or stable coin that they can use to transact. And obviously the power of this is being able to, the more you roll out, the more different teams you get connected to it, the better it is. There's a phrase which is bandied around, streamlined collaboration. That's what, I said, if you can put the DLT and the system, through the organization, you get collaboration end to end, opens up, new market opportunities. The benefits are endless. I can't see why anyone wouldn't want to do it. We see the transition happening, say, traditional securities. As I said, one of the major interests is tokenization, but tokenization coming. Initially, it's not going to be just pure tokenization. Initially there'll be a link. It'll be tokenization of bonds, but where you got the securities, you've got the paper securities in the CSDs. That'll be the first transition and representation of what is in the CSDs. But as this evolves, we see the CSDs evolving, obviously moving away from paper and ending up in the purely digital.
Yeah, lots of innovation coming from this technology. And certainly Copper's on the forefront of unlocking a lot of this in collaboration with the industry. And really, the theme of a lot of our conversations that we've had has really been around that. It's, working together with people and, kind of education and working in, tight, close circles to figure out how to deploy these technologies to improve the everyday life of, asset managers, banks, you name it. There's a lot of wide-ranging implications for this space. And so excited to see where copper goes as we continue to evolve and innovate in this industry. I really appreciate the conversation today, Richard. I know we're running up on time. Any closing thoughts?
No, Jim, I think we've covered a great range of topics today. As it is the most exciting space, from our engagements with clients, one thing we're really seeing is a lot of the clients need, help. They need guidance. They want to know stuff. So we're informing a lot of clients. So I'd say if anybody watching today is interested, wants to learn anything, a no strings attached conversation, feel free to reach out to me, reach out to Jim, reach out to anybody from the Copper platform, either via LinkedIn or copper.co. Yeah, just come and ask us, and we will gladly tell you everything we know about your digital assets if you've got the time.
Absolutely. Thank you again, Richard. It was a pleasure. And thanks everybody for tuning in. We'll be back as soon with another exciting episode of Compound Thesis.
Sure. Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Joseph.